Welcome to Survive the Jive. For 2,000 years between the Nordic Bronze Age and the Viking Age, Scandinavian people built stone ships, a bit like stone circles but in the shape of ships. And these are usually in grave fields, and they're often close to burial mounds or other grave monuments. But they don't always have bodies or cremated remains inside them. And they seem to have been associated as much with secular assemblies as they were with religious rites. In this film, I'm going to try to explain the meaning and purpose of these stone ship setting monuments, not only in reference to the archaeological context itself, but also referring to Norse mythology of the Vikings to see if we can really get to the bottom of what this ship tradition meant. Climb aboard, it's going to be quite a ride. The ship itself became the most common motif in Nordic Bronze Age imagery from around 1700 BC. It is seen carved in rocks from Denmark, Sweden and Norway. And over 100 small boats made from gold foil were discovered in a barrow in Norse, Denmark, dated to about 1500 BC. The religion of the Nordic Bronze Age is generally agreed to have been far more concerned with the sun and solar worship than the later Viking Age religion was. Solar imagery is common in Nordic Bronze Age art. However, on the island of Gotland, we see evidence on the picture stones that the solar cult persisted for much longer. It is also on Gotland where we find the oldest of the stone ship settings. Gotland has many stone ships, perhaps the most impressive of which is Tjelvars grave, which is dated to the Nordic Bronze Age. It became associated in later Norse lore with the mythical progenitor of the Gotlanders, Tjelvar or Thjalfi, who was the servant of the god Thor in Norse mythology. The stones themselves are placed closer together on the earliest of the stone ship settings. This one is between 2,500 and 3,000 years old. In later centuries, the stones of the ships were more spaced out. Gotland's ship-form graves sometimes contain bodies in stone kists or coffins, other times cremated remains in urns. The cremation graves are generally older, whereas inhumation ship graves became more common in the Iron Age, perhaps reflecting changing religious beliefs. Gotland also boasts a unique tradition of picture stones. The earlier ones from the migration era, like the older stone ships, are often found within grave fields. They are sometimes shaped like axes and display prominent solar imagery, which seems to preserve the ancient solar cult of the Nordic Bronze Age. But the boat is also depicted in association with the solar imagery. Later Gotland picture stones from the Vendel era and the Viking era depict scenes from Norse mythology, and they also still include the images of ships, usually at the bottom of the stone, just like on the older stones. From the 8th century onwards, they are sometimes accompanied by images of horses, including Odin's 8-legged horse, Sleipnir. These stones have been interpreted as depicting a journey to the world of the dead, either by horse or by boat. Peter Schenk sees both horse and ship as vehicles intended for transport to the afterlife, whereas Hildur Ellis Davidson compared these boats to the ancient Egyptian ship of the sun god Ra, moving across the heavens. But if the boats on the earlier stones represent the vessel of the sun, then why did they also make stone ships in the graveyards? And how come the Viking Age picture stones kept the boats, but seemed to show that the horse was the means by which the dead would be transported to the other world? We shall have to come back to this later. Grave fields can be found all across Sweden, and some of them were in constant use from the Bronze Age to the Viking Age. But the grave fields often contain other monuments which correspond to associated rites. One such monument is the stone ship, several fine examples of which can be found at Anundshög, the largest barrow in Sweden. The barrow is dated to the migration era and later became a ting site where people would meet for public assemblies, which may have made use of the stone ship settings. However, it is hard to date the ships themselves, since the tradition of building stone ships began in the Nordic Bronze Age and continued for over 2,000 years into the Viking era. They are certainly associated with burials and often contain a grave or cremation burial. This one is located in a grave field of some 250 burials dating to the Iron Age, called Åsa Gravefield. The stone ship is known today as the Åsa domaresäte, which means the divine judge's seat, indicating it may have been associated not just with burial rituals, but also with legal matters, again relating to the ting. The thing was not strictly a religious gathering. It was mainly for legal and political matters. But the fact that the stone ship settings are associated with the thing assemblies does not preclude their having had significance for burial rituals. In many cases, barrows are situated on the thing sites. In some cases, a special kind of barrow with a flat top was made, like this one at Gamla Uppsala, and then the thing took place on top of the barrow. So evidently, they preferred the dead to be present at the thing assembly, whether it took place on a barrow or inside a stone ship. Such stone settings don't always have to be ship-shaped. Close to a Bronze Age burial ground at Svarta on the south coast of Sweden stands a 36-meter-long rectangle of stones known today as Disasting. The name derives from local folklore, which holds that it used to be a thing site and was associated with the Disir, which are semi-divine female entities related to the spirits of the dead. An excavation in 1920 revealed burnt human remains inside the rectangle, which were dated to the Iron Age. So it seems to have been a burial ground as well as a thing site. Even today, it is still used as a place to honor the dead. Someone left this sad teddy there, which belonged to their dead child. Further east, in the same region of Sweden, Scania, we find a large grave field called Ängakåsen. The oldest burials here date to the Bronze Age. It sits next to the Baltic coast and was an ancient harbour, so again the proximity to water is significant. The grave field contains a barrow and over 130 stone settings, including 2 rectangular ones and a 60-metre-long stone ship setting consisting of 60 stones. There are also several circular stone settings, including this one with a prominent standing stone in the centre, known as the penningsten. It seemed to have a very powerful energy. It was split into 3 pieces in the 1920s to be used for building, but the enraged locals retrieved the broken pieces and rebuilt and restored the penning stone to its proper place. But what was the ritual significance of these different shapes, the circular, rectangular, and ship-shaped stone settings? It is impossible to say, but all are associated with burials. Scania also boasts the largest and best preserved stone ship setting in Sweden, known as Arle Stones. The 70-metre long monument consists of 59 large boulders on a cliff top overlooking the ocean. It was created in the latest stage of the stone ship tradition, between 500 and 1000 AD, making it roughly contemporary with the majority of stone ships in Sweden, most of which date to the Viking Age. It is thought that some of the stones were originally used in Neolithic monuments, such as dolmens, since they have cup marks on them, typical of the Stone Age megalithic culture. No graves or bodies have been found at this site, but it could still be a monument to a man who died at sea and whose body was lost. Vikings made monuments to those who died at sea, and they believed that these men went to the hall of the goddess Ron, the wife of the sea god Agir. In Fridtjof's saga it says, "So shall the guests be seen gold adorned, if we need lodging such as befits brave warriors within the halls of Ron." By far the largest of all the stone ship settings is in Jelling in Denmark. It was built in the Viking Age around a Bronze Age barrow. Not all of the ship has survived to this day, and much is now concealed by a second barrow built around 970 AD, but archaeologists have determined the ship was once 354 meters long. Dendrochronological analysis determined that the stones predate the second barrow by up to 30 years, meaning the ship was made around 940 AD. But between 958 and 59, King Harald Bluetooth also built a bigger mound on top of the first Bronze Age barrow, in honour of his father, Gorm the Old. Today these are the two largest barrows in Denmark. In 2006, archaeologists also discovered that the whole site was surrounded by a palisade of wooden planks, which stood as high as 3 men. And I think it's very likely this was intended to delineate the sacred space, so anyone entering this ritual area would be very conscious of the fact they were treading on holy ground. A few years after erecting these pagan barrows, King Harald converted to Christianity, and then he had his father's body exhumed from the North Barrow and reburied in a church. He also added a runestone in memory of his father, which states that Harald made the Danes Christian. It even depicts Jesus in a Nordic pagan style. While the stone ship tradition lasted for a full 2,000 years, there was a slightly more short-lived but also more famous tradition of ship burials and cremations, which began around the 6th century and may have begun in Anglo-Saxon England, as is seen in the famous Sutton Hoo ship burial. There was an earlier tradition of burying small boats in Norway, but the oldest full ship burial found so far comes from Snape in England and is dated to about 550 AD. The custom lasted in Scandinavia until the end of the Viking era some 500 years later. It is quite reasonable to associate this tradition of stone ships with the Vendel era tradition of boat burials, such as those from the barrows at Vendel and Valsgärde. Some of the barrows at these sites contained entire ships in which the deceased was placed along with weapons, arrows, gaming pieces, sacrificial animals, and most famously, ornate and beautiful helmets, which are now emblematic of ancient Sweden. Just like the stone ships, the ship burials continued in the Viking era, showing a continuity of belief and practice of this tradition, which clearly indicates the dead require transport to aid their passage to the next world. This tradition is also evident in earlier Indo-European burials, in which men are buried with horse sacrifices and with wheeled vehicles. Hilda Ellis-Davidson notes that the stone ships of Gotland coincide with the first wagon burials in Northern Europe. Wagons are found in northern graves in the transition period between the Bronze and Iron Ages. That is at the same time as the shipform graves first appear in Gotland. It seems possible then that at this period the conception of a death journey may have entered the north, and that the wagon and chariot used by an inland people were naturally replaced by the boat and ship among a people to whom travel meant primarily a journey by sea. It seems then that the ship grave is a Nordic development of an older Indo-European tradition from Eastern Europe regarding transportation to the next world after death. I have demonstrated in my video on horse sacrifice that in Indo-European traditions, the sacrificial horse, and also the chariot, became symbols of the sun. It is possible that in the Nordic Bronze Age, the boat was also a symbol of the sun, and was a stand-in for a horse or wheeled vehicle from earlier Indo-European beliefs. However, the royal sacrifice of the solar horse is clearly quite distinct from the inclusion of horses and chariots in burials, and it therefore seems likely that the 2,000-year-old association of boats with graves must also be a separate phenomenon from any potential Nordic Bronze Age association of the boat with the sun. As I previously explained in my video on the world tree which grows from hell, the Indo-European afterlife was a place filled with water, and that one had to traverse rivers to enter it. This was sometimes achieved with a boat, such as that of the ferryman on the river Styx in Greek myth, whereas in Norse mythology, the dead are said to wade through the rivers of hell. Yet the stone ship settings of Nordic gravefields and the later tradition of ship burial seem to indicate that in the Germanic tradition, a boat was believed to aid the passage of the dead to or through the other world. However, most men were not buried with ships or in stone ship settings. Thus, the practice was restricted to an elite, and so we cannot rule out the ship's function as a status symbol, both in the grave and the afterlife, when considering the meaning and purpose of the stone ship settings. The fact that the stone ship settings were used for thing assemblies is interesting, but does not discredit the theory that they were intended as transportation for the dead, since designated flat-top thing barrows also contain cremated remains in some cases. The barrow was seen as a doorway to the other world, such that they could be referred to with the kenning Dáuthradura, doors of the dead. It seems likely, therefore, that the thing assembly could be held within a stone ship setting for the same reason it could be on a barrow, because the stone ship somehow brought the dead closer to the living. The earliest stone ship settings from Bronze Age Gotland must have some connection to the boats depicted on Bronze Age petroglyphs. Sometimes the stone ships themselves were erected close to the petroglyphs. Hilda Ellis Davidson believed that there must also be a link to the offerings of boats found in Iron Age bogs, and one of these, the Hjortspring boat from Denmark, looks just like the boats from the Bronze Age petroglyphs. The fact that boats were given as sacrifices, rather like the solar horse sacrifices of other Indo-European religions, reinforces the theory that in the Nordic Bronze Age religion, the boat was a symbol of the sun, just like in contemporary Egyptian religion. On this Bronze Age razor from Jutland, Denmark, we can see a horse is pulling the sun through the sky, pursued by a boat, and the razor itself is shaped like a boat too. The combination of boats, horses, and solar imagery on Iron Age Gotland stones shows this belief system persisted on that island for longer than in Scandinavia. But the continuation of the stone ship settings into the Iron Age does not seem to indicate a survival of a Bronze Age solar cult. Rather, I think the tradition persisted as it was adapted to a new religious landscape. In the religion of the Vikings, the dead were not only seen as existing in the other world, but also as inhabiting their barrows, and so the ship burials and stone ships might not just have been intended to transport them away from this world, but could have been a means for them to travel back and forth between worlds as they desired. However, this theory is complicated in the example of ship cremations, when the dead are burned along with their boats and other possessions, perhaps as a means to transport them more permanently away from this world. Sometimes they didn't want the dead to come back. In Viking-era mythology, the sun was transported through the sky by horses, as in the earlier Bronze Age imagery. A ship might just have easily fulfilled this function, but travelling through the air is only achieved with the aid of a unique beast. There are no flying vehicles in Norse mythology, except those drawn by some kind of magical creature. Odin travels between worlds with his horse Sleipnir, and his son, Hermodr, is able to ride Sleipnir to Hel without using a boat. The dead warriors, the Einherja, are never said to reach Valhall by boat either. But some of the gods are associated with boats, most notably Freyr, who owns a magic ship called Skithbladnir, which is very large, but which he can fold up and carry in his pocket. It is said to be the best of ships, but it is not associated with the dead directly. However, in Ynglinga Saga, it is Odin, a god of the dead, rather than Freyr, who is said to own Skithbladnir. The largest ship is said to be Naglfar, which is owned by the enemies of the gods, and this ship is explicitly connected to the dead, since it is made from the nails of corpses, and it is destined to transport the people of Hel to battle at Ragnarok. Snorri Sturluson also tells us that Freyr's father, the god Njörður, lives in Noatun, which means ship enclosure, and Freyr's sister, Freyja, is sometimes called Mardul, meaning sea brightener, which in my opinion corresponds to her role as a goddess of the dawn, which brightens the ocean from the east. In the Prose Edda, Snorri tells us that she has a hall called Sessrumnir, meaning seat room, and this is in Folkvang, meaning people field, and this is a heavenly otherworld where the dead go. But elsewhere in the Prose Edda, we find a Thula, which is a kind of poetic list, which includes Sessrumnir alongside the biblical Ark in a list of legendary ships. Either Sessrumnir was the name of both a hall and a ship, or, more likely, Freyja's hall was conceived of as a ship which was located in the people field of the afterlife, Folkvang. The imagery of a ship in a field immediately conjures the stone ship settings to mind. If, as I believe, Freyja is a dawn goddess, something I have argued in previous videos, then perhaps this may go some way to link the role of the boat in Viking Age burials to an earlier association of boats with the solar cult of the Nordic Bronze Age. It's quite clear that the stone ship setting tradition was associated not only with burial rites, but also with formal assemblies, the thing. And I don't think it's reasonable to assume that over the 2,000 years during which these monuments were erected, there was no religious development, or that the use of such monuments was entirely uniform. Religions don't remain entirely static, even when they keep ancient traditions for such a long period of time. And when you consider that Germanic paganism didn't have a central authority like a pope, or a holy book like a Bible to calcify some of the core theological tenets, it does seem very likely that you're going to see a certain degree of adaptation over time to regional, political, and spiritual necessities that different peoples had. I think that rituals and use of monuments within Germanic paganism over the millennia was negotiated between priests, kings, and the common folk themselves based on practical and spiritual necessities reflecting changing beliefs. I'm not saying there was a huge religious shift between the Bronze Age and the Viking Age, like a single event that changed the religion, but gradual shifts. And this becomes really clear to us in the present day when we contrast Artefacts from the Nordic Bronze Age with such prominent solar imagery, and the much later Viking Age artefacts which don't put such an emphasis on this solar imagery. Nevertheless, I'm sure they all understood the stone ship setting was an ancient custom that needed to be preserved, and we're so lucky that so many of them survive to the present day. Wonderfully talented artists contributed beautiful works for this video. You can find more of their work or hire them to create work for you if you click the link in the description. This goes to my blog post, which shows all the artists and also all the musicians who contributed to this video, as well as a list of sources. Whoa there, hold your horses. If you enjoyed this film and want to learn more about Indo-European comparative mythology, then you need to get back in the saddle for this other film I made about the ancient horse sacrifice of the Indo-European king. Warning, it gets pretty shocking with some rather weird sexual elements.